wanted to welcome everyone to the webinar. We're about to get started, given that it's 12 noon here on the East Coast. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us today. I'm very happy to share that we will be spending about an hour today talking about expanding pre-kindergarten into community settings. And we have a wonderful line of speakers for you today to share their different perspectives about how and in what context we can really expand public pre-K into those community-based organizations. So to get started, I just wanted to check in with Megan Norris, who's our technical and logistics person here for the webinar. Megan, could you please move the slides forward? It looks like I don't currently have control to move them yet. Thank you so much. So again, welcome everyone. Our webinar today is about pre-K expansion, and as I mentioned, we have an excellent lineup of speakers from the national, state, and local perspective. Our first speaker, Libby Doggett, is joining us from the Office of Early Learning at the U.S. Department of Education, and she brings a lifetime of early learning experience from her work in schools, Head Start, and child care, serving both children with and without disabilities. Most recently, she was the director of the Pew Home Visiting Campaign, where she oversaw a robust research agenda and worked with advocates in target states to build political and public understanding and support for data-driven investments that align with federal guidance. Prior to that, Doggett directed Pre-K Now, a 10-year campaign to advance high-quality voluntary pre-kindergarten for all 3- and 4-year-olds in states across the country. Through its successes, Pre-K Now significantly increased the investments and number of children attending state-supported pre-K. Doggett also worked for the National Head Start Association, directing their Heads Up reading program to improve literacy instruction in early learning classrooms across the country. She began her career as a bilingual first-grade teacher at Ortega Elementary School in Austin, Texas, and now returns to the department, where in the 90s, she served as executive director of the Federal Interagency Coordinating Council for infants, toddlers, and preschoolers with disabilities and their families. Doggett holds a doctorate from the University of Texas in early childhood special education, and we're thrilled to have her here to share her national perspective on expanding pre-K into community-based settings. Our second speaker is Monica Udrone. Monica Udrone earned her doctorate from the Graduate School of Education, Human Development, and Education program at Harvard University. In January 2016, she will join the University of Massachusetts, Boston as an assistant professor of early childhood education and development. Her research interests are centered on understanding formal programs of early childhood education and care as primary settings for intervening in the lives of young children facing a variety of poverty-related risks. She is particularly interested in the ways that teacher capacities impact student learning and development. She's been a research fellow and data analyst for domestic and international school-based projects since 2007. Currently, she's directing the evaluation of a pilot project in which the Boston Public Schools Department of Early Childhood Education is partnering with community-based organizations to determine the scalability of the BPS pre-kindergarten model to institutions outside of the district, and she'll be sharing some of her preliminary results from that research in today's webinar. And finally, we have Richard Lauer, who's a member of the Regional Education Laboratory Midwest Early Childhood Education Research Alliance, and we're thrilled to have him today from the state of Michigan. Richard Lauer is Director of Preschool and Out-of-School Time Learning within the Office of Great Start within the Michigan Department of Education. And Mr. Lauer is responsible for the administration of the Great Start Readiness Program, Early Childhood Special Education, and 21st Century Community Learning Centers that provide programs and services to a variety of school entities and community-based organizations statewide. Prior to joining the Department of Education in 2008, Mr. Lauer served as Executive Director of the Michigan Head Start Association and has also worked in the nonprofit sector focused on children, youth, and family budget and policy development. In those roles, he's been a developer of Michigan's early childhood system and now uses past experiences in being a partner to develop and bridge with Michigan's emerging out-of-school time system. In addition, Mr. Lauer was an adjunct faculty in psychology for Lansing Community College for over 10 years. Mr. Lauer holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in human ecology with an emphasis in family studies, as well as an additional endorsement in applied science. And we're thrilled to have Richard here today to share a little bit about Michigan's strategy for expanding pre-K. So before we get started, I'd just like to show you a couple of the features of the webinar. So we would like this webinar to be as interactive as possible. So throughout, please feel free to ask questions through the chat box. You should see on the right side of your screen there's a pod that says chat. And throughout the entire webinar, please feel free to type in a message or a question in that box. When you hit return or enter, your message will be posted for the entire group to see. Don't be confused, there is a question box, but if you write in the question box, no one will see it. So we would suggest to keep the conversation flowing to please put your questions in the chat box throughout. So the next slide will show you the agenda for today's webinar, and I just wanted to reiterate the goals of this event. You know, through the Regional Education Laboratory, we really hope that this event will help increase the knowledge base in the REL Midwest region in terms of the research that's being conducted in Boston Public Schools about expansion. We hope to provide insight into Michigan's real-time experience in navigating pre-K program expansion, and also have a federal perspective about the preschool development grants and the expansion grant program and how that supports these more local efforts. So without taking too much time, I do want to share with you a quick introduction to the REL program for those of you that may be new to this. So today we are hosting from Regional Education Laboratory Midwest this event, which is part of the National REL Network, where there are 10 different RELs across the country that are all funded by the U.S. Department of Education's Institute of Education Sciences, or IES. And our goal is really to meet states' needs to help them answer their own policy and practice questions and using their data to answer those questions. So we do this through a mix of applied research projects, technical assistance, as well as dissemination or engagement events like today's webinar. So we hope that if you have a chance, you can take a look at REL Midwest's website and learn more about our work. Today, the Early Childhood Education Research Alliance is hosting this webinar, which is one of many alliances in the REL program. And the next slide will show you the different alliances that REL Midwest does have. And our goal in the Early Childhood Education Research Alliance is really to focus on issues of quality. A lot of our work is thinking about how to improve access to high-quality programming across the Midwest region. And a lot of our work does focus in on quality rating and improvement systems. And so today we're thrilled to hear a little bit more about how you actually implement pre-K programs or state-funded pre-K in these community-based organizations. So without further ado, I would like to hand this over to Libby Doggett to hear her perspective on the national federal policy landscape.
Great. Thank you so much, Anne Marie. I'm delighted to be a part of this and delighted to join this esteemed group that can really tell us about how it's working in the states and in the local community. So this all started long ago, and many of you were a part of actually making this happen. So thank you all for being involved in early learning for a long, long time. It was about 3 years ago when the president finally took up this mantle, and I think his advocacy and his use of the bully pulpit has really made all the difference. Thank you those of you in the Midwest who actually helped school him, and my current boss, Arnie Duncan, because I think they're using their platform at the national level has really made all the difference. We now have many, many states, and we're going to hear from one of them, who have put more money in, and it's exciting to see what local communities, particularly Boston, are doing. So it's a pretty exciting time for early learning. I'm glad that we have Monica, a researcher, on this, because this all does really need we need to always be looking at the evidence, and the evidence in early learning is clear. There's decades of research that show that early learning works, yet too many children start school inadequately prepared, gaps in cognitive, linguistic, social, and emotional skills due to unequal opportunities begin early, and they become evident way before children enter kindergarten. This gap just seems to widen as children go through school, and their long-term consequences, which is high rates of school failure, grade repetition, inappropriate special education placements and dropout, and involvement in risky behaviors and crime, and even higher risk to adult chronic disease, including hypertension, heart disease, obesity, and diabetes. I mean, that's pretty compelling evidence. And I think what's important to note is these problems aren't just limited to low-income children. They benefit the most, they gain the most, but all children benefit from a high-quality early education. I included this slide because I just think it shows that a dollar put in early is much more cost effective. It doesn't mean we need to take dollars from K-12 or college, but we need to put more dollars in because there's not enough money right now going into the system. The next slide shows, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about it, about the 30 million word gap. This just shows you how early the gap language occurs. College-educated parents are talking to their kids all the time. Those kids are getting education everywhere. Working-class families aren't talking as much, and the welfare parents aren't talking as much, and they're using more negative language, and the result is that children are entering school way behind. I included this one because there's recent research about how important math is. I hope Monica will talk about math when she talks about Boston. But there's clear evidence that math is critically important, not only for math understanding and skills, but also children who do well in math also gain in literacy and in executive functioning. So this slide shows you the gap in math that appears early. And then the next slide is about dual language learners, because these children used to be a subset, but now a quarter of our population are children who speak a language other than English as their home language. And we now know that actually these kids have a great advantage if we can take advantage, if we can act on it. A bilingual child navigating two languages at once has to process language in a much more complex way than a monolingual peer. The bilingual brain has to work harder, but it actually gives children what we call now a bilingual advantage. So I really want to make sure all these children have the opportunity to go to pre-K. We also want to give the parents the information about how important it is for them to maintain the home language, because that's critically important as well. The nice thing is, when we're talking about early learning, is we have the public behind us. This is a recent poll done by the First 5 Years Fund that shows that all groups really support early learning. They support more investments in it, and actually if you look at early learning as opposed to other investments, they will prioritize early learning. So the public is finally there behind us, and now it's a matter of making it real. When we talk about state pre-K, and I know we have this great example from Michigan, I want you to know there's a whole lot of variation. States vary in terms of whether it's a targeted program for children at risk or whether it's universal, like Georgia and other states are moving in that direction. West Virginia is another good example. There's a mix of providers. I know we're talking about doing it more through preschool. This has been going on a long time. We have to build up what's out there. We need to bring Head Start, child care, and preschool together. They're all the same thing. They're just called different things, and unfortunately the differential in funding makes it difficult to bring them together, but this is the direction we're headed, and that's the importance of this webinar today. Funding per child varies, and it varies, the states vary a lot in all of these means, and I'll go more in depth here. So this slide shows actually the percent of children enrolled, and what is really sad is we haven't made as much headway. We're only about 29% of children enrolled in state-funded preschool. We've got to get more funding at the federal level, more funding at the state level, and more funding at the local level. And you can see that there's a lot more 4-year-olds enrolled than 3-year-olds, but there is good evidence that both 3s and 4s benefit significantly from early learning. This is a slide from the National Institute for Early Education Research, which is really our go-to place for stats on preschool, and it shows state enrollment The darker the state, the more enrollment there is. So you can see that Florida and Oklahoma and Wisconsin and West Virginia and Vermont kind of lead the country in terms of number of children enrolled. Even my home state of Texas is doing pretty darn well. You can also see there's some white states where enrollment has really lagged, although Mississippi, I'll talk about later, is one of the new states to get on board on preschool. Preschool quality is critically important. That's what I'm glad that Monica's on this webinar, because she'll talk about quality. We're not just talking about access. We don't just need to get a child in a place. It's really got to have high quality standards. And in this slide, the darker the state, the better the quality. And so you'll see that Florida and Texas that had lots of kids enrolled, even California, our quality is not where it needs to be, whereas Oklahoma, even Louisiana and Arkansas have high quality programs. This next slide shows why the quality might not be so good, because if you look at the per child spending in pre-K, it's significantly lower than Head Start, and it's even more significantly lower than K-12 spending. If we had about $12,000 per child in child care, Head Start, and preschool, I think we would see the quality go up significantly. So I wanted to mention one of the major programs we've had over the last couple of years is the Early Learning Challenge. The money it was $1 billion that was distributed to 20 states. It was a competitive program, and you can see we had 3 tranches of states. The first phase is now going into their very last year, and phase 3 states are working. They've been out there having money. They've had money for about 2 years, so they're just getting started. There's a lot we've learned from these states, and most importantly, we found that these states are improving the quality of their programs, and they're getting more high-risk children into the highest quality programs. This just shows some of the specific successes of our RTT-ELC states. The more recent grant program from the Department of Education is our Preschool Development Grants. Fortunately, we had 36 states, way more than I ever expected, apply for this. We only had enough money for 18 states. If we'd had more money, we could have funded nearly every state because we got such high quality applications. What's exciting is it showed such interest that 36 states wanted this funding and that they were willing to meet the high quality standards that we set out. In this application for notice, and we wanted to include this because we think this is where the country is headed, there were 3 absolute priorities and 3 competitive priorities. The absolute priorities were obviously setting up a high quality preschool program. Because we had limited funding, we said do this in high-need communities and concentrate your money there. We obviously wanted to not advantage the race to the top states because they've had this other funding, but we also did want to include them. So we separated out the race to the top and the non-race to the top states. So both states, group of states, were eligible. Most importantly is look at the competitive priorities, because this tells you where this the field is going. We want states and local communities to contribute matching funds. This can't all be done by the federal government, by the state government, by the local government. We got to pool this funding. We want to continue, and pre-K is not a silver bullet. We need really good programs before, and we need to look at kindergarten and first and second grade and improve those years as well. And then we want to create high quality programs, and I know Monica's going to talk a lot more about this. Here are the high quality standards we put in the preschool development grants. I'll just point out a couple. We want teachers who are certified, and we want them paid what K-12 teachers are paid. We also think it's really important to include kids with disabilities. Kids with disabilities really achieve a lot in these classes, but other kids benefit as well, and it pulls the great quality that we have in special education together with regular education and gets these kids on a better track. And finally, I just don't want to act like it's only happening at the federal level, because states are doing amazing work. I'll just point out a few. Alabama has one of the highest quality programs in the country. They started with very slowly with a small number of kids enrolled, but they've made a commitment to add children, and they've added about $10 million for a small state like Alabama. That's significant every year. Even my home state of Texas is putting more money back in, and North Dakota, that hadn't had a program, is now putting funding in. So there's a lot happening at the state level. We need to pull this all together. And then my final slide says that, cities aren't waiting, and they're not waiting for the federal government. They're not waiting for the state. They really realize that this is an investment that they've got to get on board with. And so you have cities all across the country putting in funding. So now it's my pleasure to turn this over to Monica Udron, who's going to tell you more about Boston and the great research behind what they're doing.
Thank you so much, Libby. I see so many overlaps with what you just presented and what's happening here in Boston, Massachusetts. In fact, the project I'm going to be talking about today was funded in part by Race to the Top funds, and also is transitioning currently into the preschool expansion grant phase. So a lot of overlaps there. My talk today will focus on a pilot project in which the Boston Public Schools partnered with 10 community-based organizations to determine whether or not an infusion of, coaching and curriculum-based professional development could increase classroom instructional quality and subsequently close kindergarten readiness gaps in Boston. So today I'll focus on what we've learned after the first year and a half of the 3-year project. But first I want to talk to you a little bit about the acronyms I'll be using. I'll be talking about the Boston Public Schools pre-kindergarten program, and we generally refer to that in Boston as BPS K1. K0 is the program for 3-year-olds, K2 is kindergarten. We have a unique way of talking about these things here. I'll also be talking about community-based pre-kindergarten organizations. I'll refer to those as CBOs. And the BPS K1 model enacted in diverse settings, I'll be calling KIDS. So the project itself is called the BPS CBO KIDS project, lots of acronyms. The history of BPS K1 is an important context from which the KIDS program arose. A year after our mayor at the time called for a universal pre-K in Boston, the school district sought to standardize practice and increase instructional quality across all of the pre-kindergarten classrooms by offering monthly coaching to all the teachers and implementing 2 intertwined curricula. About 3 years after that process began, the head of early childhood education in the school district asked for an external evaluator to conduct a quasi-experimental evaluation, which found that there was higher instructional quality in the BPS pre-K classrooms than a national sample of public pre-K programs, and that children who participated in these public school pre-K classrooms had positive impacts on language, literacy, mathematics, executive function, socio-emotional outcomes. In short, it was a good experience for the kids who participated compared to kids who didn't participate. It was from this context that the KIDS program arose. There was this increasing interest in expanding public pre-K in Boston that was pitting up against some capacity issues within the school district, and also some needs that Boston families, particularly working families, had that the school district wasn't well suited to address. For example, full day, full year public pre-K services. There was particularly a lot of interest in expanding this program in Boston because of the findings that the quality studies and the impact studies have had in previous years. The theory of change behind this project proposed that if teachers and leaders in the community-based organizations received or participated in these 5 activities that are in red on the slide, then classroom instructional quality would increase, and subsequently, as a result of the increase in classroom quality, the child outcomes would improve too, reducing kindergarten readiness gaps between kids who participated in pre-K within the public school district and those who hadn't. We also hypothesized that teacher retention would increased in these community-based organizations, partly because of the pay supplementation. I don't get into that too much in the presentation today, but it's a very interesting piece of this project. So the big difference in practice before the kids program versus practice during the kids program in these community-based organizations was the use of these two boxed or formal curricula: Opening the World of Learning, which is an evidence-based comprehensive whole child curriculum, and the Building Blocks curricula, which some of you may have heard about. It's also evidence-based, and it aims to mathematize all aspects of the pre-kindergarten day for 4-year-old children. Now, the important thing in the BPS K-1 classrooms is the two curricula were intertwined so that they were used kind of seamlessly. Now, it's a lot to ask for community-based organizations to jump right into using two very different kinds of curricula than what they were used to. That's why we had a three-year project versus a 1-year project. But these are the two things that were infused into the classroom processes, and we also supported that with monthly meetings in with an instructional coach who is a master teacher in the BPS system. So our main question was, can the BPS K-1 model work outside of the public school district? Can we increase the quality of instruction in pre-K classrooms outside the public school district across auspice? We chose to pilot this project in community-based organizations versus, say, Head Start or for-profit early care and education centers, because community-based centers offered full-day, year-round education and care services and often partnered with other agencies that low-income families in Boston took advantage of. In total, the project consisted of 14 classrooms in 10 centers, 34 teachers, and roughly 220 children, all centered in the Boston Circle of Promise in East Boston, which are among the poorest neighborhoods in Boston. The teachers in the first year of this project in these classrooms were different from the BPS teachers in a few ways. Fewer had bachelor degrees, far fewer had master's degrees, and the classrooms themselves, the teachers were employing the creative curriculum even during the first year of the intervention, which is something we could talk about a little later on. And the children served in the kids' classrooms are different too. Please note that most kids' classrooms were mixed-age classrooms, particularly in the first year, whereas none of the BPS K-1 classrooms were, and that had implications for how the two curricula were used in these community-based pre-kindergarten classrooms. In our evaluation, we asked, how is the BPS K-1 model implemented in community-based pre-K classrooms? And how did the instructional quality change during the first year and a half of implementation? We used two different protocols to measure instructional quality. The COMET is a classroom observation protocol. An external evaluator goes into a classroom and is specifically focusing on the kinds of math activities that happen in the classroom, either spontaneous or more formally organized small group mathematics instructional activities. We also use the ELCO to get at language and literacy instructional quality. In the first year and a half of the project, we measured classroom instructional quality at baseline, which is before the intervention started in January of 2013, and then after the first year and a half in May of 2014. So what did we find? Well, there were a couple of surprises, one of which was that our teacher retention rates did not fall below the national averages. So it's difficult, it has been difficult for us to determine whether or not the retention rates changed within the centers participating in the kids project, but we do know, comparing this to rates that are nationally available for the nation, that these are fairly standard rates. 12.5% of the teachers that started the program left their classrooms after the first year and a half, and we think that had implications for a lot of classroom quality issues. We also found that really this is kind of confirming things that we suspected. There were lots of strengths in the community-based organizations. Their use of family-style meals led to stronger teacher-child relationships that had richer language exchanges between the adults and children in the classroom. The teachers themselves worked as teams and shared responsibility and vision for child learning. And then because there was very little busing used in these community programs, their parents were talking to or accessing teachers and directors on a regular basis in these centers. So let's talk a little bit about instructional quality. At the midpoint in the intervention, we were primarily interested in classroom quality, and we learned that participating classrooms on average improved in terms of their instructional quality. The graph that I'm showing indicates the quality gap between BPS K-1 classrooms and the CBO kids classrooms, and it shows that the gap was quite large at the beginning of the study. This is represented by the height of the solid black bar on the left-hand side of each bin. For each aspect of mathematics instructional quality, the gap was large at the beginning of the study. After the first year and a half of implementation, these gaps had decreased. The gaps decreased because the mathematics instructional quality in community-based pre-K classrooms increased from the beginning of the program to the end of the first year and a half. Now, let's talk a little bit about what each of the three categories means. Classroom culture is a measure of how much mathematics imagery and language permeates the physical environment of the classroom. Average quality of SMA refers to the quality of small group mathematics activities in instruction. These are the more formal, more complex, teacher-guided aspects of mathematics instruction that are occurring in the pre-K classroom. And then total quality encompasses both of the measures I've already mentioned, as well as an indicator of the teacher's attitude and excitement about mathematics and the availability of technology in the classroom. As the previous graph showed, this graph also indicates that the quality gap between the public school pre-kindergarten BPS K-1 classrooms and the community-based pre-kindergarten classrooms, the CBO kids classrooms, was quite large at the beginning of the study. This is represented by the height of the bar on the left-hand side of the graph, labeled difference, winter BPS to winter kids. Language and literacy instructional quality captures the presence of language and literacy, supporting wall art, availability and diversity of books for children, use of books in circle time, and among a few other things. After the first year and a half of implementation, the gap decreased, and this is represented by the bar on the right-hand side of the graph. And this decreased because the quality in the CBO kids classrooms increased. Our conclusions after the first year and a half of the kids project are that the classroom instructional quality can improve, particularly if the participants receive support in doing that. The coaching seemed to be the most important kind of support that the teachers and directors all reported. However, there also needed to be investment in securing regular planning time and sufficient materials for the teachers in these classrooms. The barriers to implementation that we found, or that the teachers and directors reported, all linked to coverage so that the teachers could go to trainings, could talk to the coach after the coach came into their observations, access to materials and other kinds of instructional supports. And also in our observations with classroom quality, we saw that teachers were still attempting to do 3 in their classrooms, some teachers. I think about half of our sample were still trying to do creative curriculum elements alongside of the OW and building blocks curricula. Our main takeaways is that adjusting to differences in the context between a public school context and the community-based organizations takes time. And that's starting small. This pilot really has allowed us to make adjustments to the model. So as we enter into an enlarged scale-up of this project with the preschool expansion grant funds, we're able to take the lessons we learned in these first 3 years and grow from there. But mathematics instruction, not surprisingly, has been a particular challenge for our community-based pre-kindergarten teachers. And before I end, I'd just like to thank the organizations that were involved, either by funding or training the organizations that were involved in the program. And if you want to learn more, I have provided 2 things on the slide here. First, there's a web page that contains more information, including a report of the first year and a half findings from the BPS Kids project. Our final report will be released in about a month, I think. And then if you want to contact me directly, my email is there, monica.utron@umb.edu. Thank you so much for participating. I look forward to talking to you. And now I'm going to hand things over to Richard Lauer. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. So Michigan has been on quite a journey over the past couple years with a significant historical expansion of $130 million added investment to GSRP just over the last 2 years on top of the previous $109 million that over time from 1985 until fiscal year 2013 really built up gradually over those prior 28 years. So the massive influx of more than doubling the program within 2 years really provided many opportunities, obviously, to expand access to children and many other benefits to the state of Michigan, but also came with challenges as well. I do want to emphasize that in addition to the funding that is provided for the program, as you can see, $239 million, the legislature in Michigan also has a separate line item funding the evaluation of Michigan's Great Start Readiness program. And currently that's at $300,000 per year so that we can contract with an external evaluator for our program. That has been in place since 1995, when the legislature recognized after 10 years of funding the program that to continue funding, we need to start beginning to set up a structure to be able to show outcomes for the children and as well as the quality of the program. And I do want to emphasize this 119% increase over 2 years was really based on the it was a direct result from the longitudinal evaluation that we put in place in 1995 and concluded in 2011. Those are compelling results that we found for the GSRP impact on not only short-term academic, social-emotional, cognitive skills, but long-term as well through high school graduation in 2 years. All of the reports are on our website, which will be later on the slide. It's michigan.gov/GSRP. Along with the historic expansion came a few other changes to the program. As you can see, GSRP is funded by a per slot allocation currently at $36.25. That as part of the expansion prior, the funding was at $3,400 per slot. There are 2 other options in addition to the part day slot that this money is associated with. We allow for a school day length program option that uses 2 slots for 1 child, and that school day length program must be at least 6.5 hours a day. And we also allow a GSRP Head Start blend option, and that uses the per day slot allocation that you see on the screen combined with the federal Head Start per child funding. In this option, all requirements of both programs must be met through a school day length program to utilize the combined funds. The expansion allowed Michigan to go from 23,879 children in fiscal year 13 served to 37,500 children served in this last fiscal year. Another piece that changed over the expansion years is that the legislature changed the income eligibility threshold, which is on the left-hand side of your slide, and reduced it. We were at 300% prior to expansion and of the federal poverty level, and they constricted it down to focus the limited funding on the most high-risk income kids. So they moved it down to 250% as the threshold. But they also then made a modification that the number of kids who could be over income not meeting that threshold was reduced from 25% prior to 10%. So at this point in time, all children must meet 250% of the federal poverty level or below, and there's an exception of 10% are allowed to be over income. However, they do have to meet other risk factors as determined by our State Board of Education. The other piece I want to mention is that with the expansion, the legislature also mandated a quintile prioritization process applied to that 250%, and they also made an exception to the income eligibility factor so that children with IEPs who are in special education, children who are homeless, or children who are in foster care are automatically eligible regardless of income. And so that was a positive move forward as well for the state of Michigan. Michigan has a regional administrative structure for GSRP, with our intermediate school districts as our only eligible grantees. We have 54 intermediate school districts. However, they then subcontract to local districts, local public school academies, as well as community-based organizations. So the same concept that Monica mentioned, CBO, that is a focus of our program. All GSRP providers also must minimally meet a 3-star level within our state's Great Start to Quality tiered rating and improvement system. With the expansion, the legislature did recognize the need for intermediate school districts and all of their local partners to be able to have funding for outreach, recruitment, enrollment of families. And so they made a provision that 2% of a grantee's total funding may be used for these purposes, recognizing that there would be, if you have a great product and a great program, if it's not out there and people don't know about it, it won't be utilized. One of the most significant changes that we found over the last 2 years as part of the expansion is the amount of funding going to community-based organizations. Historically, from the 2 years after piloting the inception of GSRP, so 1987, GSRP since then has always had a funding amount set aside in statute for community-based organizations. But the amount was directly related to the amount of funding given in any annual budget. Now with the expansion, the legislature actually mandated, regardless of the funding level, that a minimum of 30% of all the slots in the funding go to community-based organizations. So you'll see that we began with 8% of our total slots of and funding available were going to community-based organizations in 2013, and we actually hit the mark of the legislature's challenge of 30% this fiscal year starting October 1 of 2015. And it wasn't, as you can see, it was a massive increase in the first year, going from 8% to 22%, and then it was a more gradual gain over the last 2 years. So to achieve this significant increase within the private child care sector of community-based organizations, we actually added over 300 new partners, but 200 of them were actual community-based organizations. The other 100 were other academic local school districts and school academies. But I don't want to say that to minimize the fact that 200 new providers of state pre-K were community-based organizations. And statute does allow for-profit as well as nonprofit organizations. And the nonprofit includes faith-based providers. So we have a quite robust mixed delivery system of providers in Michigan at this point in time. So what did Michigan learn from this rapid scaling up over the last 2 years and more than doubling the program? The first thing is to take advantage of the existing infrastructure and quality providers already providing preschool. And so we looked first and foremost, because we define community-based organizations also to include Head Start, we look to the Head Start community as a key partner, as well as our existing network of GSRP community-based providers from the decades of service provision prior. That is what helped us go from 8 to 22% in the first year. Another thing is to utilize the child care system infrastructure. So that's the infrastructure of child care resource and referral centers that exist across the state to assist in reaching out to the private child care sector. Those institutions really understand their local communities. They tend to know the overall quality of the providers. They understand who has capacity to serve additional children and who has the capacity to expand. So making that connection to the child care system, resource centers, is an essential part of rapidly scaling up state pre-K. It's also very important to provide an orientation to the state's pre-K model and all the requirements for the private child care sector. It's also important to set the expectation with the grantee, as in our case the intermediate school districts, as well as the providers, that they all participate in continuing education and professional development that supports the implementation of the state pre-K model. One of the things that we did see was in a couple instances, local private child care wanted to participate, but once they understood the full scope of what a structured model we have, that it actually frightened them and they backed away. However, they were not forgotten, because we then challenged our grantees, the intermediate school districts, to then work with those programs and so that they could be a future partner and really take time to dive in and coach them, because ultimately if they were deemed to be a quality program, we want them as part of our system. So the other piece is just ensuring coordination and collaboration for a mixed delivery system of providers. That is one of our foundational principles, so that all state and federal funding is maximized. Finally, although tough, for us in Michigan, maintenance and enforcing fidelity to the state pre-K model is an absolute necessity. My opinion is you do a disservice to your state and to your program by making exceptions to the model to accommodate for scaling up challenges. Plus, in our case, we had a solid evaluation upon which the investment was actually made, and if we start compromising that model, we're then compromising the ability to continue to say that the program does result in positive outcomes, not only for the children, but for the programs as well. So the other piece of this is that, The other piece of this is that, what does quality mean? I've stressed fidelity of the program and quality. For us, we require that all classroom level teaching teams are provided with a coach with a master's degree in early childhood education. So we establish a 1:15 ratio so that a master coach is assigned to 15 teaching teams at a maximum. Those teaching teams then assess the classroom quality and put together a professional development plan for each of those teaching teams at the beginning of the year, and then they monitor it 2 more times throughout the year, so that each classroom is monitored for classroom quality 3 times per year. It's also important to celebrate the other impacts of scaling up besides just expanding access and ensuring quality. For Michigan, I like to talk about the impact of state pre-K expansion on Michigan's workforce and economy. We added nearly 950 new teaching teams. So that's 1,900 new jobs as a result of this expansion. And it's not just adding jobs, adding quality jobs. We require a lead teachers to have an elementary teaching certificate with an early childhood endorsement or a bachelor degree in early childhood education or child development. All associate teachers must also have an associate's degree in early childhood education or child development or a CDA credential. So for us, partnerships with institutions of higher ed and other credentialing organizations is critical. The other piece of this is rapid expansion. We did see some shortages of qualified staff within pockets across the state. Michigan has a statute allowance for GSRP that compliance plans are an option for some teaching teams that are so close to finishing their degrees, but they just haven't finished them yet. So you must be mindful of the current finite early childhood workforce capacity across the whole system in your state and the implications, because one of them is cross-provider poaching of staff. We saw this twice in the last year where in some communities where there was a major shortage, who can pay more really got the person. Was it state pre-K, was it Head Start, or was it a private child care provider? Finally, some other factors to consider when scaling up, whether or not licensing is to be considered. Michigan requires all providers, regardless of setting, to be licensed. And we also set stricter child-adult ratios. Ours is 1 to 8 in Michigan, and we cap our group size at 18. So with these parameters, facility space was an issue. In Michigan, with the recession, as in many states, many early elementary buildings closed down. And so we had buildings, but they couldn't be reopened quick enough within 2 years to be able to meet the demand. They were closed for too long. They couldn't be brought up to a level to be licensed quick enough. So with that, I'll end Michigan's story. Here's our website address, michigan.gov/GSRP, and I'll throw it back to Erin.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you to all of our panelists. I just wanted to put another plug in for sending in your questions. We've gotten some great questions so far, and we're going to go ahead and start a bit of Q&A, but please feel free to continue sending in your questions while we're doing this. And apologies, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Erin Roth, also with the REL Midwest. So we got a really great question come in for Monica about any examples of CBOs in Boston, any particular examples. And I think this question really gets at something that cuts across all three of our panelists' presentations today about leveraging quality and recognizing quality in early childhood education environments within all three of our panelists' presentations. So Monica, if you have any examples of CBOs that were part of the BPS Kids program, and maybe how you recognized those and leveraged that quality and why it was so important.
Sure. So I'll start by saying two things. There was a request for proposal. There was a proposal process where the organizers of the Kids Project, particularly the Director of Early Childhood Education in the Boston Public Schools and his partners in the community, solicited applications for the program. And the idea was that in the pilot phase, centers would be recruited that already had sufficient capacity to handle this kind of program. And so there's also an interest at this pilot phase of recruiting centers from across auspice types. So the community-based organizations ranged from large agencies like Catholic Charities, YMCA, Greater Boston, Boys and Girls Club of Dorchester, to smaller standalone centers such as the Wealthy Child Care Center, Page Academy, etc. The complete list, actually, and a map of where these centers are located is on the webpage that I think was probably not well linked, but a link to which is offered in the chat box. And you know, we really try to solicit a lot of different kinds of data, not just classroom observations, but coach information about what she saw as strengths in the classrooms that may not have been captured by our instruments. Happy to talk about that more in detail if you're interested.
Great, thank you, Monica. And if I could throw out a kind of a different question for Libby, with the big signing of the Every Student Succeeds Act yesterday, do you foresee any changes to pre-K expansion at the federal level?
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out. I meant to mention the great celebration that we had yesterday with the signing of the new ESSA. For us in early learning, it solidified that education begins at birth, and there is a preschool development grant part of that. Also, I think if you look through the entire law, you'll see how we have integrated early learning into all pieces of it. So it's clear that we're not just starting at kindergarten, but we're starting it actually at birth. In terms of funding for preschool development grants, just to be honest, it's not in the budget right now. Even the 18 states we're currently funding are a little bit in jeopardy. I hope that we are going to get funding. We are hopeful that funding will be in the budget, which we still don't have. I think it was supposed to be today, and maybe we'll get a continuing resolution. We hope to have a budget, though, that includes the $250 million we need to continue funding the current 18 states. And we need the money again next year for their final year. At that point, this program is jointly administered with HHS, and so the Congress preferred that HHS have the reins, even though it will continue to be jointly funded. And they also preferred not to be so clear about the quality standards that we have in place. So the program will change slightly, but I think the field knows that this is not going to happen unless schools are engaged and we have quality engaged. We need everybody working to make this diverse delivery system really work.
Thank you, Libby. And we had one more specific question come in for you, Richard, about market rate in Michigan, and is the 3,600 you mentioned, is it below, equal to, or above the market rate? And if you also want to speak to our earlier question for Monica after that, that would be great too, about how you recognized quality in CBOs that you worked with in Michigan.
Sure. So one of the things, knowing that child care providers, their main concern was that, obviously being able to have a incentivized financial benefit to participating as part of GSRP. Our funding amount is substantially above the market rate. And one of the things, though, is that in addition to our per slot amount, and most child care partners, as was mentioned earlier in the presentation, provide full-day programming. And therefore, they actually receive the $7,250 amount, not the $3,600, because they're providing a full day of service in Michigan. The piece that goes on top of that is because we tie our providers to our quality rating system, we have incentivized financially the star levels. So at the 3-star level, the providers for child subsidy kids are getting 50 cents more per hour for the payment. For a 4-star program, they're 75 cents. And for a 5-star program, it's $1. And so we are blending and braiding the funding in many unique ways to be able to incentivize bringing in child care providers and raising, who are already quality from our point of view, because they participate in the Great Start to Quality tiered rating. And that's how we identified our provider base. Those who are a 2-star, who may be close to a 3-star, we actually ask the ISDs as grantees to work with them so that they can become a future partner. We want to diversify the base as much as possible.
Thank you, Richard, and thanks for tying in how the quality rating system is intertwined with all of the expansion efforts. That's a really important point. So we are nearing the end of our 1 hour already. It feels like it flew by. Wanted to thank everyone, all of our panelists and attendees again. It was really great to not only get a national, state, and city level perspective on pre-K expansion, but also have the research and practice perspectives tied in so well together. You'll see we have here on our next slide, if I can advance it a little bit, thank you. We have just a snapshot of what our REL Midwest website looks like and the types of resources that you can find there. And you can also feel free to contact us if you have any more questions that come up at any point, feel free to let us know, and we can connect with panelists and get back to you to answer your questions. And we also have a feedback survey. The link went out in the chat box. We'd really appreciate, in our quest for constant improvement of our webinars and events, we'd really appreciate your comments and thoughts about how the webinar experience was for you. So the link was in the chat box, and you'll also receive an email in the next couple of days. If you get a chance to fill that out and get it in by next Wednesday, we would very much appreciate it, and the link will close after that. Thank you again, everyone, so much, and especially to our panelists, Libby, Monica, and Richard, for participating. That's just provided such a well-rounded and valuable perspective on pre-K expansion across the country. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, everyone.